So I'm very happy to welcome everyone to today's Enclave reading, the last in our current series, and delighted to have Myung Kim as the poet to send us off. The first Enclave series was conceived and curated by Ray Armentrout and Jean Huving in 2020. Charles Alexander, David Weiss, and I are hosting the current series. We'll be taking a break of several weeks after today's reading and be back at it for one more go-round beginning in July. All our Enclave readings are archived on the Chax Press YouTube channel, and you can also link to them via the Chax Press website. So off we go. Charles Alexander will introduce Myung.
Thank you, and happy Mother's Day. Myung Kim is the James H. McNulty Chair of English at the State University of New York at Buffalo. She is the author of Penury, Commons, River Antes, DURA, The Bounty, and Under Flag, which won the Multicultural Publishers Exchange Award of Merit. Her most recent book, Civil Bound, appeared from Omnidawn Publishing. She has been widely anthologized in places such as Moving Borders, 3 decades of innovative writing by women, Premonitions, the Kaya Anthology of New Asian North American Poetry, and American Poets of the 21st Century, the New Poetics. She has received fellowships and honors from the Fund for Poetry, the Djerassi Resident Artist Program, Gertrude Stein Awards in Innovative North American Poetry, and the State University of New York Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Scholarship and Creative Activity. And she co-edited the volume Poetics and Precarity. Early in Myung Kim's River Antes, a book whose first 2 lines on 2 different pages are household radix, italicized in the bottom right corner of a page, and conjugate in brackets toward the top left of the next page. There's a passage that ends, and in this place, the catalog of books may be inserted. This place is, in some ways, the remainder of that page, almost completely blank. But this place is also the radix or base or root of the house, though radix also suggests both radius or space from center to edge and radical, because such spaces and places are areas of risk. But this place is also the language, conjugated or not, in which this place appears, both through its words and through its word spaces, page spaces, word places. And all of this place is also incomplete, or as the following line, again italicized at the bottom of a page, tells us, house installation, partial slab. And remember that house radix or base, where now slab is the base, the partial base of our house, the partial basis of our being. Walking into Myung Kim's work, and I often feel like it is a walking in, as sometimes at any moment of an ordinary day, I picture pages of her work in my mind as spaces open to such walking. And I do that. There are shapes on her pages as real to me as the layout of my neighborhood, of any neighborhood I have ever walked. But make no mistake, the spaces are not exactly open, or certainly not empty. That is, they are informed by diaspora, by misstepping in the language, by pressures on person, speech, movement, by the ties that bind. Her spaces are inhabited spaces, and even when blank, the habitations are works of and within languages. Kim's most recent book is titled Civil Bound, but those words appear earlier in her work, and in some ways are a concept in her work going back to Under Flag. Being under flag is to be civil bound. Being in language is to be civil bound. Her book, and books too, are works that are civil and bound. Her book Penury ends after 4 blank pages with a poem of 7 sparse couplets, the last 2 reading, where in this further dwelt, abide, nestled close, civil bound. So much is contained in that this of the first couplet. but also in dwelling, abiding, nestling, being close, being civil, being bound. One of the primary ways of binding is language. Juliana Spar writes in her introduction to the 10th anniversary edition of Kim's DURA that any story that one tells of oneself must be told in language, a thing that one must share with others in a particularly complicated way. And that Kim's sharing, her tying up of language with culture and nation, and I would say with space and being, makes of her work such a crucial part of American literature. And it is also this that makes her work so moving, so resonant, so beautifully connective. Connective. Even the lacunae are connective. Tissue is seen and unseen, but always felt and heard. Please welcome Myung Kim.
I have expressed very decidedly the idea that the Indian should be taught in the English language only. There's not an Indian pupil whose tuition is paid by the United States government who is permitted to study any other language than our own vernacular, the language of the greatest, most powerful, and enterprising nationalities under the sun. Commissioner of Indian Affairs, 1879. All newcomers should learn our language. They should learn about our values, and they should learn to accept the way we live, accept our norms and values. Flemish MEP, 2016. We have room for but one language here, and that is the English language. It would not be merely a misfortune, but a crime to perpetuate differences of language in this country. Roosevelt, 1917. The Korean people will be absorbed into the Japanese. They will talk our language, live our life. We will teach them our language, establish our institutions, and make them one with us. Since the 1953 ceasefire, the 154-mile-long borderland, once densely populated and farmed, was abandoned. Trees and grasslands replaced towns and crops. The first impression is the unlimited audacity of man in ripping open the mountains, draining marshes and lakes, penetrating the jungles and impounding rushing rivers in an effort to throw two great oceans together. It is the greatest assault ever made upon nature. The white man, brushing aside all obstacles and scorning danger, will have finished this greatest of all monuments of marching civilization. It is an inspiring sight to witness this unseemly, death-ridden tropical country changed into a place of beauty, right in the midst of disease and death. The Panama Canal is a wonderful feat of engineering. It will be a glorious triumph of scientific sanitation. Students were led to a room where Anglo names were written. on the blackboard and were told to choose a name from the board. Students did so without knowing the meaning or pronunciation of any of the names. Each student had to respond Indian or no Indian at evening roll call to declare whether they had spoken in their native Indian language that day. So I've been reading to you from some excerpts from my research notes, reading notes, so forth and so on, as a way to frame my reading this afternoon, which will be from my book titled Civil Bound. And I'm hoping that sort of weave of quotations provides some sense of the kind of work that's being undertaken. The book is dedicated to my mom, Subok Kim, 1924 to 2016. Arches, vermilion, platform of movable objects, or live spectacle, arch of armaments and charts, a link of people sorted, size, strength, age, bellflower broth, liver broth, hemispheric lust. Not in the codices or chants. Charity kin, hair and lime burrowed. Well-placed towers, glowing colts, thrown down the bells, scoured off the foundation. Corruption balked before alms, boulders, mechanical parts, or persons pledged to asunder. Humble rules for eyes and fingers. Errant convalescence. By arms and legs fettered, by the wallets of tongues, taught to make coffins for each other. In the tone of guides, sacred place. Fence around the burial site. The leaf blower. It is conceded that an interoceanic canal through any of the isthmus passes of the Western Hemisphere is a necessity for the present and prospective commerce of the world. 1872. Scolding wings removed, cuts flushed, choke canal, abuts agricultural sunken medical, one pair gloves, 3 yards calico, whiskey, crackers, watch guard, 1 deck cards. The Settlers' Leisure, Fort Union, New Mexico, 1863. in America shape you a the all in line with the it expressed very decidedly the idea that the Indians should be taught in the English language. From Atlas bulbs, a skull grows. Rift immunology, cut from hoof or fingerprint, packed off vessels, hollow. Pity doves, silicate, the Great Lakes, silt, slit, syllabaries. Traduction, thin and aspen grove. Persons to appear, persons who made debris architecture. Circumpolar, rifles at the ready, aimed next to distribution of ground corn. What could not be determined as a dead seagull or feathered driftwood. In days we will reach land. The body of unripe strawberry. Profusion of red dirt on windowsills, exposed skin, creeping shrubs. Mississippi River. Someone has caught a swordfish at the dam. Many people help to pull it up to the pier. Talihina, Oklahoma. Yankton, South Dakota. All threaded among dogwoods, a backlit forum. How precisely and how raggedly water erodes the door jamb. Bull of landowner Poison said, the oxen must be considered in one cluck. Work song or ablation. Shoals adjudicate a mausoleum. What is the progeny of renegade topos? Frozen ground refuses the headstone. A flung injury, initialized equator. Arborization, fish biomass, mammal biomass, livestock, humans, wild mammals. Infirm to the ground, rituals performed in abeyance, aperture, splice 15 to a stretcher, and fiber optics, dissemination of warheads, limbic, accentual. Compliance, ugly. Pathogenic microbes, sinew burns. Compressed air drills, dynamite, dredger, uploaders, shovels with dippers. Arbitrariness, intermittence with which the gates to the safety zone open, BOTG, tank, Tainer, Hoyer, Evergreen, Hoyer, Itawa, TTX, Triton, K-line, phosphorus intersects species, vestigial faces on stone pillars, pig iron head, woods, wounds, slick. Remove 268 million cubic yards of earth. Intercellular herding of must clear forests and cultivate these in the manner I seeking protection divested of proximity, corpuscular, capillary, fermata, forced migration, scriptorium, poct. Willed geography, cut off long hair, forbid native language. Isolated sepal, the pitch of surveillance. By immolation, by pestilence, enter among rustling plastic edicts, batten, the seal of some cyclic drone subsidiary concentrated into fewer and fewer languages, dilation or distension of a hollow organ, cultural transmission, involution. Hello. In America, fish English. Level of detail afforded by asphyxia. Torsion. Were to lungs filled with sea. Grief, ganglion. The idea of forgetting when a person is unspecified, not specified, edamon, dried corn stalks in a semicircle are walls, English proficiency, citizen, life in test, civilizing, mission, property in severalty. All newcomers must cinder wages smell of camphor and plaster, thus residual projectile decibel atrophy preceding sunlight if the chronometer, coroner, if hands or woven burn holes. Flagrant mass, carved and inverted, raised burdock. Smother symbols, tattered conduit of jawbone and ear. Stone knives in murky liquid. Receding immunity, carrying energy grids. What is it? Presented by the underbelly of moths. What is a mutual duration? Acetone femurs, inexorably ignorance, locution cauterized, blast radius, skeletonized rights, the habitable excised, the hospitable excised. From defective articulation, alalia, with confusion of words, paraphrasia. From defective intellection, alogia, of motor origin, euphemia, with inability to read, paralexia, with inability to write, paragraphia. How a swallow is achieved. Greenish, violet tinge her lips. Untethered island, bare rigging congregates, pains, adoration. Great Lakes stations. Port Washington, Wisconsin, 1930 to 1981. Duluth, Minnesota, 1939 to 1981. Chicago, Illinois, 1933 to 1978. Buffalo, New York, 1935 to 1978. Rogers City, Michigan, 1922 to 1987. Lorain, Ohio, 1933 to 1981. Habitation, wooden crates in a nameless territory. Dented objects for gathering water. Plastic footwear, 2 sizes too small, how the cracked heels hang over. The vine suggests sweet potato, but notice the cradle of thorns. Skiff ferry, militarized, Eradication's resourcefulness speaking in a prestige language. Jaundiced shade of bombardment, singed skin, graphene. Between ribs, what might be shale. Ramshackle peony, meridian bit in the mouth. Thank you. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Wow.
Wow. I think we are gonna open up for a little conversation just for about 15 minutes. But I first invite my colleague Penny Nathanson to kick it off.
Yeah, thanks, Charles, and thanks so much, Myung. That was so powerful and moving. I had such a sense of things just kind of looming up unexpectedly, and that anything might loom up next. And what was maybe most crucial for me is the tremendous sense of the silence and space out of which anything came forward. And a lot of what came forward was certainly terrifying. And if there hadn't been that silence and space around it, as that sense of a kind of vastness out of which it comes and which remains mysterious and untapped, sometimes it would have felt really unbearable. My sense also is that, and anything can come forth from that silence and that spaciousness, which is also full of kind of potential energy. And so for me anyway, there's a tremendous sense of hope and a kind of invitation to resolve in that, or resolution, as in being resolute in that kind of back and forth between the big silence and the particular things that come forward. So that's my 2 cents. And thanks so much. A really amazing reading.
Do you want to just talk a little bit and before I jump it back and forth, or how do you want to do this, everyone?
She wants to respond.
I think if you want to jump back and forth, that's absolutely great.
Okay.
Anytime.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, partly what I think might be interesting for us to try to do together, even in the brief time that we have, is that I'll try to respond by pulling out certain observations that I think we might all want to talk about. So thanks, first of all, for that contribution. And I'm very, am I coming through okay?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So the one sort of component that I want to pull forward as we continue to talk is this notion of the unbearable, which is also in some sense imbued with energy, not only a kind of deflation of the unbearable, right? Like the sheer weight of it. So the idea of the unbearable as a kind of capaciousness or a kind of energy, I'm very interested in that notion. And also just to pick up on this notion of where hope is or might be. And I love this kind of shuffling that happened between an invitation to resolve / being resolute. So those are the things I really want to notice in the comments that you made, Tenny. Yeah. Is that helpful for others, just to let you know what I'm picking up and what I'm particularly drawn to in Tenny's comments? Okay. And if you want to actually respond to my response to Tenny, please feel free. Or if you want to introduce any new elements. Again, I know we don't have very... Why is my screen so tiny? How do I make you big? So I can see more faces.
Oh,
Gallery view.
Put it on gallery view.
Do I have that thing?
Up in the right-hand corner, there's something that should say view, and you can change it from speaker to gallery, You can also make it go full screen if you wish.
I'll deal with it.
Okay.
Find it sooner or later. Okay, go ahead, somebody.
I just want to say, any of you now can unmute yourselves and speak.
I think one thing that I'm wondering about is like going to the places that you mention, and sometimes to me to go somewhere and feel what it's like to be in that location on the earth, it makes me more resolute,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I guess I started noticing and writing down so many of the unbearable, the words like things asunder and errant and unabled and rifts and cuts and slits and that was the thing. But I guess I agree with Shell, who just said there's some moments in places here that I get a grounding that seems more possibly hopeful. And also I agree with Tenny that the open spaces between these things somehow make it slightly more bearable.
Could you say something about irreversibility?
Let's see. I still can't see who's speaking.
That was Judy, right?
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to ask you to say more about how you're thinking of that word, irreversibility.
Well, like the Panama Canal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's there. You can't undo it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Trying to rid people of their language and being someone successful. And so some people lose their language. So processes that are irreversible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess there's a lot to say there. So I'm just going to take one sort of small snap and say, I think what also fascinates me about the irreversibility is how they also tend to like permutations, right? And slight, like while irreversible, I think partly what they do is they kind of rejigger what's like an end stop or stop of a transmission or a cultural process. So I'm interested in that hinge, if that's the right word, between what's irreversible and what it possibly opens up as an occasion to understand what keeps re-cementing that irreversibility and how to pay attention to that apparatus. Yeah, mm-hmm. I don't know if that gets anywhere close to anything, but
Thank you.
Sure.
I just wanted to say that what's reversible is the word, and there's a very special hold that you place on every word that you enunciate in a world of critical resource shortages. Mm-hmm. You make every word count, mm-hmm. and you draw everything possible out of each individual word. And it's an utter delight to see you and hear you after all these years.
Good to see you too, Henry.
I wanted to say also, Myung, it's wonderful to hear you read the work and the words, as Henry was saying. It's really intense, and the relationship between the sound of your voice and the articulation of what's on the page, knowing how those words appear on the page and the spaces, and there's this relation between the sound and the visual that I think really totally came across in the reading today. So thank you.
Thank you.
I would just like to say that I'm finding the conversation really interesting, particularly given Myung Kim's remarks. Something I wasn't totally picking up was the kind of movement from the quotations at the beginning, which clearly pretty much stated out unequivocally a certain attitude toward the politics that have pertained with respect to the suppression of language. But as I was listening and hearing the discussion, it would seem that the poetic response is to explode the limitations through the language which is imploding. I don't know if that seems correct or not, but I thought I would put that in.
Mm-hmm. And I would love for people to respond to each other if that seems at all something that seems to be happening naturally. For those of you listening, please include yourselves.
And Tyrone had something in the chat that relates to something already said. Do you want to ask that, Tyrone? Unmute yourself and.
Why don't you just read?
Or I can read it from the chat.
I can do it, Charles.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Hi, Ming. I was wondering about the question of irreversibility and reversibility for the hinge that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering that if we think of the hinge, so then, because I've been thinking about these epigrammatic sort of bits of language that you use. And I didn't know if we should think of those as fragments or shards of something that has passed, or seeds, germs of possibility for something yet to come, or both.
I think you just answered your own question.
Okay, good. We're done here then.
Yeah. No, I think the shards that are seeds and perhaps also the other way around is, I think, precisely a productive way to think about how I was expressing hinge, right? So yes, I'm agreeing with you and also appreciating the shard seed conjectural space that those two words open up.
Judy Reutman raised her hand again. Judy? No?
No, I forgot to lower it.
Oh, okay. One thing I'm so aware of in listening to you read, Myung, and I'm aware of it on the page too, is that your work almost requires one going wholly in. It requires the intensity that it seems to require an intense reading like that. And yet it also maybe allows an intense reading like that. It not requires as in, oh, it's difficult, but it makes me want to go in there. And so I sort of, in a strange way, feel like the poem itself is this act of engagement between what it is literally on the page or in the sound and how we accept it and how we react to it. And maybe if that's a kind of hinge too, or part of it is, where do we go from there? Where do we go from this this engagement?
Mm-hmm. It seems like something that maybe others can also respond to, rather than just me, right? Because that seems like a question for all of us in a way.
I'm just going to say how moved I am by the act of remembering the seed shard, the way it holds what has happened, and that seems like key. absolute key to going forward, is this kind of memory. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'd just say that sense of sort of space surrounding or silence kind of allows the hinge to be there. It feels like there's the place where I notice that hinge possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Would anybody else like to ask a final question? Or I like Ivan Sokolov's comment that he talks about the debris architecture that one of the poems mentioned, being related to the shards and fragments. And I love that sense, debris architecture. Both where does that come from and where does that go to?
Mm-hmm.
It makes me think of the word remember, which means literally to put things back together, to remember, to put the members back together. And I think of that often. It's a kind of transformation, but it has allegiance to the past.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It also acknowledges that there has been a dismemberment. Nice.
Lindsay, I haven't met you officially, so hi. Did you have a hand up? I wasn't sure.
Oh, I wasn't sure either. It's such a pleasure to meet you. And thank you so much for that incredible reading. I was just thinking about the question that was asked earlier about what to do with the way that your poems in their sparseness and rigor demand intense engagement, but that there's a question of what then to do with the engagement. And I thought that was a really actually helpful way of thinking through what's so incredibly potent and also like politically useful about about your poetry. I was thinking about this earlier conversation was also making me think about Walter Benjamin and the Arcades Project, and especially the lines where he says that ruins are an allegory for thinking itself. And so there's something about this fragmentariness and the way that the rigor of engagement allows for these uncertainties of global connection and destruction, I guess, to expand without having to land upon any kind of actionable certainty, but instead create like a space for meditation that's possible because of the way that language mediates an encounter of violence, I guess. I was thinking about that, and I was just so intrigued by the notes that you read in the earlier part of this event, because I've been thinking a lot about just sort of like the global processes of an analogy between Japanese colonization of Korea in the early 20th century and the processes of settler colonialism and in North American, like that have struck like North American indigeneity. And these things are incredibly like historically and geographically separated. And I guess kind of wondering like what is fruitful about this material for you?
Wow. I think I'm becoming more and more aware of how the kind of mutual imbrication of, very different geographical and historical spaces are actually in some kind of conversation with each other. and especially around the kind of, logics of empire or colonization, and especially around cultural transmission and linguistic, almost, I want to say, eradication or, beyond suppression. So these large swaths of especially how to imagine and implementing the will of, the will of what was called science, right? Over nature. How these deeply embedded agendas resonate across what I'm calling linguistic, historical, cultural spaces and temporalities. So it's not specifically those, sets of notes or the readings or research that I was doing, but perhaps more in the service of how to begin to think in a much more devoted way about these transfers, points of transfer, points of connection, points of deeply ingrained senses of what constitutes memory, what constitutes power, undergirded power structures, especially in relation to history, time and memory, and human beings. So it's, again, not topical or thematic in terms of what my research notes might suggest, certain kinds of, reverberations around certain topics, but it's really more how to think these, what I'm calling points of transfer, deeply ingrained patterns of really, there's no other word for it, willpower, right, over subjects, landscapes, natures. Yeah. So I don't know that I'm answering your question pointedly enough, but hopefully this gets somewhere close to answering your question.
That was brilliant. I really loved hearing your response. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's
Go, Charles, go ahead.
Just going to say there's a bit in the chat from Sarah on getting back to debris architecture, but moving on from there. Sarah, did you want to ask a question or read that?
I can read it. Hi, Myung, Sarah Rosenthal.
Hi.
Hi. It's just kind of a free association, I guess. I just wrote debris architecture creates provisional abodes. It speaks to me of resourcefulness, determination to survive and create, or survive, create as one word, to go on a whole task. I don't know, just sitting out on that concept a little bit more.
Okay, great.
But I like what you just said to Lindsay. I thought that was really generative. I feel like when you say something like global economic political power or something, I never really, I'm always reaching for those terms. First of all, I suck at those terms. And second of all, I never really feel like there's a term, that you can, so I just liked trying to kind of climb underneath the sort of, poli-sci international relations terminology and name it in this kind of more rock bottom way that you were just doing in response to Lindsay. So I appreciated that.
Great. Well, yeah. Charles, bring it back to you.
Well, we are hitting on our hour. Okay. So I just wanted to really thank you, but also thank everyone. This has been a pretty incredible 8 weeks of this edition of this Enclave series that I think Tenny and David and I have been really glad to bring together. You know, we bring it together because it's what we want to hear and experience, but to be able to share it and open up conversations like this is fantastic. So just thank you very much.
Yeah, ditto what Charles said. Thanks to everybody. It's been really, really wonderful.
Thank you, everyone, for being here this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. There will be a video of this up within a day or two, and that'll get announced on various social media.
Okay.
But it will also be on the Chacs Press, chac.org website. You can find the media link and get to that. So bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Myung. Thanks
Be
so
well.
much, everybody.
Thank you, Myung.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.